Do you think UFOs, the paranormal, weird history, cryptozoology, and outsider art are pretty darn cool? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to High Strangeness with your host, Steve Berg.
The video version.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I lived in Los Angeles for like 20 years, and then I recently moved back to Omaha, Nebraska, where I'm originally from, to be closer to my parents and stuff. So
lovely. Yeah.
Yeah,
I had a feeling I went there in the early. I think I hitchhiked across America in like 1991, and I think we met some students in. I think it was in Omaha. Would there be a university in Omaha?
Yeah. There's University of Nebraska, Omaha. Yeah.
I think we spent a couple of nights in Omaha, but it was a long time ago.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, well, it's kind of a lot like any kind of mid-range city in America, but it's got its culture. It's got a good music scene, and so it's only gotten cooler as time has gone on. When I grew up here, it was a little bit boring, but now it's got a big indie rock music label scene.
Oh, right.
So
yeah, and you're there,
which always helps. Yeah, exactly. Now I'm here, so I'm really bringing up the cool factor. Everyone, welcome to High Strangeness. Tonight, I don't know if you could guess by the lovely tenor of his voice, but my guest is the wonderful Mark Pilkington. Mark, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, you are a big get to me, sir. I actually, you were on my list of top 5 when I first started this podcast about a year ago. But I wanted to do a bunch of interviews before, so I could learn how to be an interviewer, because I didn't want to waste my opportunity with you, because I have had a lot of questions for you since I read your wonderful book, Mirage Men.
Okay. Well, I'm here. Fire away.
I gotcha. So before we get into, Mirage Men and UFO kinds of stuff, I want to ask you, because I mean, you have this incredible book publishing company called Strange Attractor, and it's kind of, I don't want to make American comparisons, because I feel like that we always do that, but to me it feels like almost like a feral house, not maybe as like I don't know,
we're not as controversial, perhaps.
You're not. It's not as controversial. Yes, thank you. Exactly. But I guess. Please tell me about that, because I mean, while Feral House is controversial, they have definitely made some pretty big contributions to the world of marginalia in America. And I'm just curious about how you started Strange Attractor, and just tell me a little bit about the publishing company, if you will.
Yeah. So, funnily enough, it is 20 years old this year, and actually, you've frozen.
Oh, you froze.
I don't know if it's me or you that's.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
But should we just carry on, or do you want to?
Yeah, carry on. I think it corrected itself.
Okay, so yeah, this year marks 20 years, unbelievably, of Strange Attractor Press, and you're absolutely right to point to Feral House, who certainly were an inspiration, along with British equivalents of things like there was a thing called Rapid Eye magazine that was around at when would that have been? Late 80s, mid 80s. Now I can't remember, but that was a similar just sort of sweeping up the matter from the far fringes of kind of the culture. And interestingly, the very first Rapid Eye, which I think I have here it is. I can tell you when it was published. It was very large format. There's Aldous Huxley on the cover.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
So this was published in. Sorry, this is not perhaps that interesting for your listeners. This was published in
for me.
1989. And you can see, it's very much the counterculture interests of the time. So you got William Burroughs, Kathy Acker, Stuart Home, Alistair Crowley, Derek Jarman, Brian Geisen, Psychic TV, Colin Wilson, Situationism. But interestingly,
Wow.
so that's Christopher Mayhew, not that is Aldous Huxley. Christopher Mayhew on LSD, Hitler's UFOs, cosmology, the Kennedy conspiracy, dream machines. So that's a pretty, it's a good syllabus there.
Yeah.
And I remember there being an article about cattle mutilations in there, which is for the UK pretty early on.
Right.
So yeah, so I was very much inspired by things like Rapid Eye, to a certain extent, Feral House, but also, I was working at Fortean Times magazine and wanted to kind of, bring all these disparate elements together. I was always interested in, experimental music and film and culture and generally. So it was a way to kind of knot all those things together.
Right.
And initially it was an anthology series, like it was going to be a series of journals, and the plan was to do those quarterly. So that was what was published in March 2004. And last year we published the 5th edition of the journal. So that's not bad. Not bad.
Wow. Yeah.
What was meant to be quarterly ended up being one every 10 years or something. But
hey, sometimes if it's going to be good, it's got to take a minute. Really quick,
exactly.
you mentioned Psychic TV. And Genesis P. Orig's second band. The first obviously was Throbbing Gristle, which I'm a fan of. But did you? I mean, by then in '99, was Psychic TV or Genesis kind of kicked out of England? Then I can't remember when.
This was 1989, actually. So
89. Oh, so
yeah.
Genesis is still living there again.
There's a whole article about them and the Temple of Psychic Youth. They were still in Brighton on the south coast of England then. And I think it was a couple of years later that they ended up in the States. I actually saw them play in San Francisco in, I think, 91 on that same trip, which was great fun. It was very memorable.
Was that... Yeah, I bet it was a memorable... I've watched a handful of their concerts, like, on YouTube. But, I mean, it must have been... I mean, yeah, it's so psychedelic that it's not even psychedelic. It's like it's really just the most far out stuff. Genesis was a true original.
He was, yeah. He's a controversial figure, perhaps. Didn't always treat people as well as he might have done, but had a very significant cultural role over here and increasingly everywhere, thanks to his after image. But yes, no, I was lucky enough at age about 16 to see Psychic TV in their kind of very full-on acid house phase, and it was it was still one of the wildest things I've experienced, and it was actually, I had to retreat to the balcony because it all got a bit overexciting for my young self. But there was a lot of nudity, shall we say?
yeah. I mean, it's hard to describe what Psychic TV even is if you don't know about them. But it's like, Throbbing Gristle is often attributed to being like the inventing industrial music, and Psychic TV kind of took it a step further into like weird land. I mean, it is very surreal music.
Yeah, and when they began, they made a concerted effort to be the opposite of industrial music. So there's a lot of kind of delicate songs and guitar music, and quite sort of lyrical love songs and things. And then, as everyone in the UK did, in the mid-80s, they all discovered MDMA and ecstasy and the rave culture, and that consumed almost everybody who was in the music world at that time. So and they took it on well, playing 3-hour non-stop 3-hour kind of crazy dance parties where everyone would take their clothes off and be tripping balls. It was pretty good. Anyway, but that hasn't.
Did Psychic TV, and I can't remember if the name of the venue was called The Factory, but was it called The Factory, that where New Order played and Happy Mondays and all those people?
The Factory was the label. The Hacienda was the venue in Manchester.
That's right.
And I know they played there in the early days. I'm sure they probably did in the later days as well. But one of our authors, Graham Duff, in his book Foreground Music, has a very enjoyable account of seeing them at the Hacienda in, I think, 1982 or 1983. That sounds like it wasn't the most thrilling gig, but it was an experience nonetheless.
Right. Well, as a fan of a lot of British music from the UK, the Hacienda was always a place I'm like, oh man, I wish I could have experienced that.
Yeah, I never did, but.
Well, you're a musician yourself, and if I'm not mistaken, you kind of focus mostly on like ambient type and electronic type music.
Yeah, electronic. I wouldn't say purely. I should always preface this. I'm not a trained musician. I'm not someone that can kind of, play to order or anything like that. But I am a improviser, so I like to just kind of see where things go. But electronics and synthesizers, occasional keyboards, noise boxes. But I kind of came out of the London, no fans, experimental underground of the very early 2000s. Me and some friends were we're all running a club that played mostly kosmische music from Germany in the 1970s, krautrock and kosmische music.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Then lots of bands and improvising groups kind of emerged out of that. There was quite a really tight community around there. So that would have been very early 2000s, really, beginning of 2000, 2001. So,
do you record any music? Do you record any of your music?
Yeah, there's quite a lot. The sort of current projects that sort of have records and CDs out. There's one called Teleplasmist, which was a made-up word, a sort of neologism for a female producer of ectoplasm. I thought that was quite good, but that seems quite fitting to the music. And another one, Luminous Foundation, which is a bit more kind of, I wouldn't say pop music, but it's more kind of upbeat, and so has drums and drum machines and things in it. But yeah, they're both in the psychedelic electronic spectrum, but I think, sort of sound like that. I would like to think sound like their own thing.
That's great.
But,
well,
are you? Yeah, and there have been many projects over the years, but those are the two kind of most active ones, I would say.
And can you find those on Bandcamp or something, or online?
They're both on Bandcamp, and they're both pretty active. So there's kind of new stuff out there. There's a new Teleplasmist album coming out in a couple of months on vinyl and download, called Of Nature and Electricity, which has beautiful cover art. A friend of mine who's a book dealer found this little kind of homemade notebook of things called pendulagraphs from the late 19th century, and it was someone who was trying to tune into the kind of almost the I guess you'd say the music of angels or the music of the spheres, and trying to kind of translate this into visual patterns using a kind of spiraling. I don't know how they'd have done it in the 19th century. It must have been a very fine feather or a sort of dripping tube of ink that was then spiraling around on paper to create these beautiful sort of patterns that you today look like. There are things called harmonographs today which have a similar effect. So they create kind of spiraling patterns on paper, moving with gravity and with pendulums. But they're really stunning images. When the record comes out, you can see. But
Oh, I can't wait! I'm going to binge your music. I'm excited that it's available.
Oh, please do. Yeah, yeah. There are people who like it. What can I say?
Yeah, yeah. I have a feeling I'm going to. I'm very into ambient music. Look, I like straightforward, music with lyrics and chord progressions that you can predict. That's fine too. But for some
Oh,
reason,
me too.
the last couple years, sometimes I feel like lyrics just get in the way, and I just want to hear music. and ambient music really scratches that itch for me.
Yeah, I mean, I would call all of this, I'd say, sort of cinematic. Almost always without vocals, occasionally with spoken word stuff and things. But or on the on our last Teleplasmist album, I found a recording made by Alex Sanders, the sort of 1960s, 70s through the 80s kind of self-proclaimed king of the witches, and found recordings of him doing out-of-body time travel experiments with his partner in the early 80s. So we got permission from the Museum of Witchcraft to use those and kind of set a track to one of those, which is very cool. Proper, so someone's transcendental experiences set to quite transcendental music. So
That's incredible. I mean, already this is why England's cooler, because you have a witchcraft museum.
it's
In America,
I'm
yeah,
sure
in America they'd burn her down.
Yeah. The Museum of Witchcraft and Magic is in Boscastle in Cornwall, a really beautiful, on the far southwest of almost the tip of the country. It's an incredible place it's been in existence since the 1940s in various locations. But the current incarnation is fantastic, run by a brilliant guy called Simon Costin. And we actually put out a great book of photographs of images from the museum collection, photographed by candlelight by a photographer called Sarah Hannant, it's a lovely book. It's called Of Shadows. The book is called.
This sounds amazing. Oh wow, I have got to go to that museum when I'm in the UK next time. Yes,
Oh,
please. Well, Mark, when I was messaging you to try to set up this interview, you mentioned that you were busy working on an Austin Osmond Spare tarot deck. Please tell me about that a little bit.
Yes, I am very busy, constantly busy with that at the moment, which exists, but I realize I gave a friend the copy that I had here, so I can't show it to you, but I can show you this is a book we published in 2016, which kind of first documented the deck's existence, Lost Envoy, the tarot deck of Austin Osman Spare, and we reproduced the deck, sort of every card in the deck inside. That's a nice one.
That is a beautiful cover to that book too.
Yeah, this is a kind of representation of the backs of the cards, which are all differently coloured. Sorry, I'm trying to see if I can do this. But we put that out, about 7 or 8 years ago, and people kept asking us, can we reproduce the deck itself? But the problem with the deck itself is that there are all these. It's hand drawn. It's a one-off. That Spare drew, we think, in sort of 1906 or so, but it was never published. We're not sure it was ever intended to be published. And then in 1944 was given to the Magic Circle Museum collection in London, which is a bit like it's like the kind of union for stage magicians in the UK. So like the Magic Castle in Los Angeles, a bit similar.
Oh, okay, sure. I've been there a handful of times.
Yeah, so that went into their archives and was really never seen again until a friend of mine, who's one of the archivists there, saw a listing for it in their kind of logbook, and it was still sitting in the same drawer it had been placed in 1944.
Wow. I probably should have done this before I even asked you the question, but would you mind in case my listeners don't know who Austin Osman Spare is, would you
Sure,
mind
I
just
was
giving me like a
thinking
little thumbnail of who
yeah.
he was?
So Austin Osman Spare was a once extremely obscure, well, so has had a kind of roller coaster career both while he was alive and in the afterlife. But his kind of prime really was the Edwardian era, and he was born in London, and at a young age began to be quite recognised and celebrated as a prodigious draftsman and artist. Um, and he kind of he was a proper kind of technically a Cockney, kind of from a very working class background. Um, his father was a policeman, but he just had this incredible gift for draftsmanship. And he began exhibiting, at quite a young age in his 20s, and soon became something of a kind of enfant terrible in London. And his work was it was both mysterious and often very, very grotesque and kind of um, not so much obscene, although work that we would think of as obscene has emerged since. But his stuff, he was doing kind of satyrs and gargoyles and hags and night creatures, but all really powerfully animated through his line. But the other thing that made him sort of become a kind of cult figure was that he was also a very active and publicly practicing sort of occultist and magician. And he was developing his own practices for kind of casting spells and drawing, shaping shaping events around you to kind of draw what you want from them using specially charged designs and illustrations and kind of techniques of sigilization. And but in the 1950s, he had a kind of renaissance after a terrible kind of career crash over the course of the two world wars, which saw him ending up living in just real squalor and poverty in South London, as a lot of people were at that time. But he was sort of rediscovered and began to be feted and exhibited again in the 1950s. And then, unfortunately, just as things seemed to be picking up for him, he sort of died from essentially, I can't exactly remember now what he died of, but something that it's partly of neglect, shall we say. He could have been treated, but then he sort of disappeared, but was kept in the public eye in this sort of occult world by two writer and artist couple, Kenneth and Steffi Grant, who lived in North London and published very unusual books that kind of merged the sort of ideas of Aleister Crowley with the mythos of H.P. Lovecraft. And this is in the 1960s, so it was unusual and far out for that time. And he drew in, so it'd be this sort of the kind of recipe book for Kenneth Grant is sort of Aleister Crowley, Austin Spare, H.P. Lovecraft, voodoo, Sax Rohmer, Arthur Machen, kind of pulling all these kind of facets of occult lore and supernatural literature into these very strange brews. But he kept the spirit of Spare alive. He and Steffi and Kenneth kept the spirit of Spare alive. And then he began to sort of find an audience with people like Jimmy Page, the Led Zeppelin guitarist, and Barry Humphries, who was a brilliant satirist and comedian. I don't know if you've ever come across Dame Edna Everage, was his most famous character. Sort of a household name in the UK and in Australia. But he was also a great collector of unusual art and literature, as well as appearing on television in drag every weekend.
Right.
So Spare kind of always had this sort of afterlife, mainly in the occult community, but also within collectors of sort of symbolist and unusual decadent artwork. And then gradually, as happens, his star has risen. We published a brilliant biography of him in 2011 by Phil Baker, which was the first kind of serious literate biography of him. And in the 1990s, he was kept his spirit was kind of reanimated or animated by a kind of esoteric publishing house called Fulgur Press, who did a lot to kind of promote him as well. So there's always been this kind of current of interest in his work, but unfortunately, his kind of reputation can now be reflected in the price tags for buying his paintings, which once, even 20 years ago would have been a few £100s, and are now sort of tens of thousands of pounds. So
wow.
But anyway, if you type his name into Google or whatever, you'll see a wide selection of his artwork. Coming back to what we were talking about earlier, and I don't know if this is where I'd have first seen his work, but there was a late 80s psychic TV album that had an Austin Spare artwork throughout it as well, called
Interesting.
Allegory and Self. Sorry. So yeah, it's kind of tied into there's always ties to the occult and the music kind of cultures of England, and he's a undeniably brilliant artist who was
right.
complex and multifaceted personality.
I'm gonna have to order that book, the biography from Stranger. What was the title of that book again?
It's just called Austin Osman Spare: The Life and Legend of London's Lost Artist by Phil Baker. We've actually just trying to see if I can see a copy. We reissued it just a few months ago, so with some extra images and material, including the only known color photograph of Spare, painting one of his models. And I can't remember her name, but she's a model who appears, in several of his paintings.
Interesting. Ooh, thank you. That was a wonderful description. Actually, I didn't know about as much about Austin Osman Spare as I thought I did until you just said that.
So we reissued his tarot. So we've just through a massive, our first ever Kickstarter campaign, which was now 2 years ago. It took a long time. We raised enough money to kind of recreate and publish the deck, as well as a new edition of the book, which has been a monumental operation. So that we ran with Jonathan Allen, who discovered the deck or rediscovered the deck and edited this volume. So, but copies are finally finding their way to new homes as we speak. So
incredible. Well, that's awesome. Congratulations! I'm excited to get that copy of that deck.
Yeah, you will be able. We've printed enough that you'll be able to. So.
Ooh, yes. Well, I'm gonna put all the I'm gonna put the link to your publishing house in the show notes, so people because I was looking the other day at the titles you guys carry and publish, and oh my god, like half these books are books that are books that I need. So this is very much up my alley. I think the people listening to this show probably are going to be very interested to peruse the old website for Strange Attractor, because there's some good stuff on there.
Yeah, lots more coming as well.
Good. So, Mark, I have a question. So in the late 90s, I think, in the early 2000s, there was this group, and I don't know if they called themselves the Circle Makers. That was with Rob Irving and John Lumberg. Were you a part of that?
I was, yes. So there was, it was started by Rod Dickinson and John Lundberg, who were artists, art students in the kind of early mid-90s. And Rob Irving joined later, and I was roped in. I think 1997 was when I first went out with them. I got involved as a journalist for Fortean Times. I met Rod, and they invited me out as part of my kind of research to make a formation with them. And then, as I say, I joined the band. I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah.
I got involved. But I was, I was. And sorry, Will Russell, and that was another. I probably shouldn't be saying who was involved. Actually, that's too late now.
It's a Fight Club situation, yeah.
At the time, it was quite. It's a long time ago now. But it was, treated for obvious reasons very seriously. We had to basically make an oath not to talk about what we were doing.
Right.
Yeah, we still won't really publicly lay claim to specific formations, partly for reasons of it's more interesting if the work is anonymous, but also for obvious other reasons. But yeah, it was an amazing thing to be part of. But I was always, I like to say I was a grunt. I just did what I was told, and often not very well. There was very, very rarely more than four of us on a specific formation. A couple of particularly large ones involved more people, but it was very difficult to coordinate the different groups. When everyone's stomping around carefully in pitch darkness, no one's you're not talking, you've got no sources of light. It was kind of a very magical and, in hindsight, improbable thing to have been involved with. I'm very honored to have been involved.
Was the intention sort of when, with Lundberg and Irving, when they kind of started this group, was it kind of like an artistic expression, or was this a little bit of tricksterism too? Like, hey, let's because back when they were doing it, crop circles were a big thing in the UFO community. And I can't tell if it was one of these things like, hey, let's have a laugh at the, and kind of trick some of because people took these crop circles seriously, didn't they?
Oh, for sure, yeah. And so, it can be all of those things at once, would be my answer. And I think it was all of those things at once. And sometimes specific formations would have a specific purpose. Certainly in the kind of, there are sort of three, well, probably more, but there were at that time sort of three phases of circle making. There were Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley, who started doing it in the 1970s, and they kind of did everything really up until the mid to late 80s. And they were doing it as an artistic expression, but also as a fun thing to do after going to the pub, and a fun way to try and get into the local newspapers. But they were also drawing on artistic techniques that they knew, and they were also interested in Doug Bauer was certainly interested in UFOs, so it was partly an attempt to create the sense of a UFO landing site. But then, everyone who was involved was being an artist, was being a trickster, was being a prankster.
Right.
But there were definitely some situations that were absolutely designed to fuck with very specific people's heads, some of whom are quite prominent in certain circles these days, and it is all documented, but I don't want to be talking about it here. But
I think I might know who you're talking about. At least I have a decent guess of a couple of people, but I won't mention them.
But it was, it was pretty, as for artists, it was extremely challenging, and there's obviously a long tradition of landscape art, of people making work in the landscape, and this was a pop expression of that.
Mhm.
But as as projects, they're incredibly challenging, both physically and mentally. You would be
Yeah.
absolutely wrecked at the end of, you'd have about a 5 hour non-stop just crunching crunching through these
Yeah.
fields,
That's going to
making,
make your quad sore.
yeah, I would have. I mean, genuinely think I know that some of us have suffered, as we've got older, some of us have suffered quite seriously from, probably not unrelated, skeletal and muscular problems, from doing it. But
Suffering for your art, Mark. That's classic.
yeah, but yeah, it's just, when I look back, I've actually amazingly still got some of everything was, this is yeah, the designs were often made in CAD, computer aided design, but in the field we'd just have sheets of paper with plans on at different scales, and so you'd be working very, very lo-fi. We were just using, rope, measuring tape, and planks of wood with ropes in either end. Later groups would use things like laser pointers to kind of create a grid matrix, so you became more of a giant dot matrix printer kind of
Right.
effect. But it was incredibly lo-fi, really. I used to say we were just like a giant spirograph. There's that same principles as that. You
Amazing.
plant a stake in the ground and just kind of spin out from it with a rope and kind of flatten as you go. But
It's incredible.
yeah, and we would, some of the craziest things we'd do would be like do it through absolute driving rain, just because no one would believe that people would go out and do
Right.
create a formation on driving rain. And people would say at that particular one, the farmer flattened literally at the crack of dawn, so no one ever saw it either. So that was that was worth doing.
That is commitment. Well, all the crop circle kind of scene that you guys had going on kind of leads me into my next question, because I have been absolutely obsessed. I will say obsessed for probably 15 years. About, gosh, maybe not even quite 15 years, but at least over a decade ago, I saw a clip of this short documentary that John Lumberg made called The Mythologist, about Armand Victorian or Henry Azadel or Umtumba Intuba, like whatever. He's got many names. But I sort of like get fixated on these kinds of like unique, weird characters who come in, make a big splash, and then disappear. And I was wondering, so in case my listeners don't know who Armand Victorian was, maybe we could explain who we. First off, let me just ask: did you have any experiences with Armand Victorian or Henry? And would you mind kind of telling my listeners who he was?
Yeah, I mean, so John Lumberg, who I made the Mirage Men film with, and I met through Rod Dickinson and Rob Irving, who he was the kind of other key figure in the Circle Makers, and still is, actually. Sorry, John. Yeah, he's still very much active. Not making surreptitious crop circles, but doing making them as artwork and for commercial purposes. So Henry Azadel by day ran a kind of grocery shop in Nottingham, and apologies if I get any details wrong. It's been a while since I thought about him. But by day ran a grocery shop in Nottingham, but he was also writing for, at the time, a lot of the conspiracy and UFO and so parapolitical zines like Lobster. He was a regular in Lobster, the British conspiracy mag, which was actually, was and still is, a decent, a fairly sensible magazine. So he's writing for things like Lobster. He would appear in, I'm sure he would have appeared in things like UFO magazine and in the States. He got into some American stuff. He was an early figure on the kind of early internet, paranet sort of bulletin board, computer, paranormal research community. I'm trying to think where else I'd have seen his work published. But he was one of the kind of instrumental figures in the late 80s in kind of exposing what became known as the Avery and the kind of invisible college of characters, some of whom are now very very celebrated and rightly so, and so public, who were involved, personally involved in UFO research, but professionally were involved in the American intelligence community, or the military, or defense contracting. People who, at the time, quite rightly, had to keep their interests in UFOs secret because it wouldn't look good on their resumes,
Right.
And might have questions asked from within their places of work. So they had this, again, pre-internet, they had this kind of network of file information sharing and generally networking, communicating. People like John Alexander, Kit Green, Jacques Vallée, Hal Puthoff, characters that are very familiar to anyone who's has a sort of even a passing interest in American UFO research.
Right.
But Armand Victorian was one of the first to kind of present this as some kind of, he present it in a sinister light, as some kind of clandestine program to, I think he had it upside down, and which most UFO researchers did, had it upside down in the sense that these were people who were keeping the truth from the rest of us, where actually they were all just, that's John Alexander, sorry, is another obvious one, but these were all people who were desperately trying to find out what was going on, and trying to use their positions and reputations within their various communities to kind of forward to further research rather than to cover it up. But there was no reason for anyone to know that at the time, because they were keeping things very secret. So someone like Armand Victorian was presenting this as the kind of the cabal keeping the UFO secrets from the masses. But he also wrote a lot about things like mind control technology, implant technology, things that are now have different things have different names now. Things that we now call kind of gang stalking, or what else do they call it now? I don't know, but that's a common term for it now. But so attempts to kind of drive people crazy through either microwave beams or electrical implant technologies, or generating hallucinations, faking alien abductions. MyLabs, now they're called. So this is the sort of area that Armand Victorian was working in. But he was also, which again, I don't think it's had a connection to the other parts of his life, but he was also a rare orchid smuggler and was actually convicted.
Yeah.
This as well. So just a very colorful character.
I mean, the movie of him just writes itself. I mean, and not only that, he was an orchid smuggler, but he actually, while he was a smuggler, he also discovered a rare orchid that they named after him. So he's made he made a significant contribution to the orchid world, which I'm like, it's perfect.
So John Lundberg made a short film, The Mythologist, kind of about his story, which is a fantastic film. I think it's now...
It is.
You can see it online, I think now.
Yeah, you can. I actually, for about a decade, would write him every 6 months to a year and just ask him, like, hey, can I get a copy? Can I buy a copy? I'll give you like $200 if you can send me a copy. But he was unable to get it from the BBC or something. And then
Yeah, I
finally,
think it was,
he was actually nice enough the day it got released before he put it out on Twitter. He goes, well, you can stop bothering me now because it's available. And I was like, oh my God.
that's
And it
great.
didn't disappoint. I watched it like 3 times in a row. It's great.
That's fantastic. And that was the mythologist was really the genesis of Mirage Men, in that former CIA science and technology officer Ron Pandolfi, who had been actively engaged with, I think, mind-fucking Armin Victoria and Henry Azzardello, essentially, excuse my language,
No.
suggested, John spoke to him about Henry, and Pandolfi essentially said, why are you interested in Henry? The person you really want to go after is Rick Doty. And then John
Boom.
came to me to ask who Rick Doty was, and that was the start of it, really. And they're comparable. That's they both fit the classic mold of the kind of mercurial trickstery figures that just haunt the UFO landscape, but also the wider kind of paranormal, parapolitical landscapes.
Yeah. I mean, he truly is a fascinating character that, like, I feel in most of like American ufology, he's not really known about. When I've asked other like American ufologists about, like, I remember hearing the name, but like his impact was pretty big, whether people in America know it or
Yeah,
not. Like, I mean, he was, all the phone recordings he was doing with, just like calling the CIA and then like recording the phone call. Like, I mean, he's just like and like, part of me, Mark, I mean, like, was he just a very precocious, aggressive guy who was truly interested in the UFO topic? And then there's like, the paranoid 2% part of me is like, was he actually working for someone?
Yeah, it's impossible to know. He was I think, was he Armenian? I think he was Armenian.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not. Again, it's very much possible that he was, either being played by, but it would have been KGB still, I guess, at that time. Could well have been being exploited by Soviet, intelligence organizations. He may not even have known that he was doing that.
Right.
And far stranger things have been done in the name of counterintelligence or intelligence gathering. So it's very, very hard to know, but that was part of his mystique. The thing would be, and this is classic, just very familiar from the history of everything, but in our what we're talking about in the UFO field, the trick is to find, if you're trying to, and it still goes on, very much going on now, the trick is to find people who are doing what you need them to do anyway, but you just, if you're operating a kind of intelligence or counterintelligence or influence operation, the trick is to find the people who are doing what they do anyway and just kind of encourage them, rather than, you don't have to kind of build someone from the ground up. So
right,
it's the way he was basically bothering the American intelligence community and just pissing them off. Even that is something, that's just kind of keeping them off their focus, creating distractions, publishing and publicizing things that people probably definitely didn't want to be identified with or talking about. That's an annoyance, and an annoyance is enough to be worth supporting. So
right, and then he just kind of, I mean, I know he went to jail, I think, for not paying his phone bills, but like, or something to that effect.
Yeah, I think that was...
It's always hard to tell what's real with him, but then he just kind of disappears from the UFO scene and like never to be heard from again. And
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I can't remember what. I know that there were sightings of him. I think he just dropped, as people
Yeah,
do sometimes, just moved on. But had made a big splash. Probably, there's no doubt he was probably. Well, I'd say no doubt he was almost certainly quite paranoid and kind of making it, having been fallen foul of the law and different, over here and in other countries as a smuggler and
yeah,
things, he probably saw it as quite sensible to sort of stay out of the limelight, I think. But
right.
yeah, it's hard. I
Well,
mean, it's hard. It's what's amazing because it was just what people did, what we did back then. Just the kind of networks of dissemination of sort of samizdat information that he was part of just seems incredible that they could have existed then. Just
yeah,
physical paper zines that were just being distributed around the world, and you'd just write off with a couple of dollars in an envelope, and receive an envelope back with sort of hand stapled and photocopied zines in them, and some of them things like Lobster and Magonia, which was my kind of go-to zine. They were still just hand stapled, but they were at least printed, in a print shop rather than
right.
just Xerox. But certain, things like Sources Mirror, I think, were still Xerox.
Yeah. Mostly, yeah.
But it's incredible that these communities were able, and I'm so slightly rambling here, but I think one of the big changes in that whole world and obviously the entire world, but the reason I think the kind of paranormal, parapolitical, UFO, everything world has become such a kind of um, potentially dangerous place is just
Oh yeah,
the speed and instantaneousness of the dissemination of bullshit, basically, which
yeah,
in the past took months, if not years, to kind of work its way through the community as people just were passing photocopies of things around, and now you can
right.
contaminate people's minds in milliseconds and do incredible
Yeah,
damage, and that's
right.
it's not just we're talking within the UFO paranormal parapolitical culture, but it's happening everywhere. But
I mean, you,
uh,
you don't really need Rick Doty anymore. You just the internet does it itself.
and the people.
Right. In preparation for this, I reread Mirage Men probably for the
Oh,
third, maybe fourth time. And
wow.
first off, it is. I can't say. I think for a lot of people in my like specific age group or around my age group, this book was a real like. I remember when I read it, it was like my jaw was kind of on the ground because I realized a lot of the UFO narratives that I loved as a kid were total bullshit. And I was like, whoa. It was like I had to sit with it for about a week. And then it wasn't one of these things where I was like disappointed, but I was like, wow, you have to everything is now reframed for me after reading that book. But one thing that's definitely clear to me is that you were not writing this as like a journalist or an author who didn't know about this stuff. You clearly have a deep knowledge of UFO
Oh,
history, and at least at one time you can tell we're very, very, very into it. So
absolutely.
what was kind of the moment, or what kind of got you starting to think on this new in this new way where with disinformation and that kind of getting away from the UFO core story that we've all like, been fed, for decades. What kind of turned you on to thinking in this new way?
I'm trying. I mean, I was always really, really, the part. I was, I was a UFO kid, from
Mm-hmm.
the late '80s onwards. So I absolutely was immersed in. I started out immersed in the hope that it was all real, and then over time, began to have more of an objective perspective, and then through getting involved with things like reading things like 14 Times and Magonia, which is Magonia was and is, I think, perhaps the most important UFO and sort of contemporary folklore journal of the late 20th century. But they just those are the things that started to reframe, and writing by people in those magazines and journals just totally kind of detached the lore from kind of belief, and so turn the lore into something that you actually analyze as text. Start to view UFO narratives as texts in the same way that you would reading literature or watching a film. As you once you kind of detach yourself and your kind of hopes and dreams and your kind of beliefs from the stories, you can just start to analyze them for what they are, which are stories being passed from person to person to person, drawing upon a growing familiar storehouse of ideas and themes and memes, and kind of repeating motifs and things. It just becomes incredibly fascinating to start studying them in this way. And but then when you start to realize the mind-blowing part then, which would have come in from people like probably Armin Victorian and others, is starting to see attempts to manipulate those narratives and those structures and that lore, and actually weaponize it and turn that back against in people within certain communities. That's when I absolutely just became so that took on a whole new dimension of interest for me, and and that's really where it's that kind of. And I wonder if this comes. I've always also had an interest in broader supernatural culture, but also history of magic and sort of occultism, partly through its sort of clandestine, subterfugal nature. But all of these things ultimately are attempts to influence culture and influence people's, influence minds, win hearts and minds, essentially. So I think that's where that's always been a kind of, for whatever reason, an interest of mine. So I think it was just seeing all those things kind of dovetail into the realization that entire communities of belief always have been and can very easily be molded and shaped. And of course, that has been the role of religion for millennia as well. These are, maybe it comes through. I mean, again, I am just looking down at this copy of Rapid Eye here. Probably comes from things like reading William Burroughs as a teenager when he's talking about societal control systems and things like this. Suddenly realizing you can see many different facets of the world through that lens. But the UFO culture, the UFO lore is just becomes very transparent at a certain point. As to how because it's a world, it's a culture that is just embedded in in martial military history. It's embedded in political Cold War history. It's embedded in popular culture. It's this and spiritual, religious belief and culture. It's like a perfect meeting point for all of these things. So it's just I mean, it is. UFO culture is now, again, it was when I was first getting interested in the 1990s, early late 80s and through the 90s, it was the predominant folkloric kind of expression in Western culture. it was active,
I'd
it was
argue that it
alive.
still is.
Well, I
Yeah.
think it went away and it's kind of it's definitely come back.
It's
But what,
come back raging, yes.
yeah, it's come back hard, yeah. But yeah, the thing is that you can actually see this happening, you can engage with it, you can actually be part of it. Is it's kind of incredible and thrilling and sometimes terrifying and often
Yeah.
disappointing and
Yeah.
frustrating.
Well,
But
it's weird. One thing and I don't want to like harp on the disclosure 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, wherever we are, but like it does seem that more than ever, and maybe it's because of the proliferation in social media, but like it does seem that this time around, this iteration of disclosure culture has a little bit more of a fascist kind of hard right Bill Cooper aspect to it that is very unsettling to me.
yeah, I wonder if it has more. I think that's always been there. I think it's always been present. It's present in the very, very earliest iterations of the UFO lore.
Yeah.
It's yeah, I talk about it in Mirage Men, but even the first, well, probably the second. Well, I don't know. Sorry, I'm just trying to work it out. But anyway, the flying saucers that landed, whether that's the second or third popular UFO book, I'm not sure, by George Adamski
Right.
and
Oh yeah.
and Desmond Leslie. Adamski was his sightings were taking place with an active member of the American fascist, party,
Yeah.
William Dudley Pelley's Silver
Yeah.
Shirt movement.
Yep.
George Hunt Williamson, who was got he was the person that got Adamski into channeling extraterrestrials, contacting extraterrestrials. He was an unabashed Nazi, who was
Oh
writing
yeah.
some of the earlier contactee books. It's no accident that the people they contacted were essentially Aryan Nazi hippies from Venus. They left swastika boot prints in the desert floor. It's all there if
Good
you want to
God.
see it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, and so that's just baked in, and that predating that, Adamski was essentially a theosophist, a member of a late 19th century sort of spiritual new religious movement that, again, unquestionably, wasn't itself fascist, but it's not very hard to draw the kind of certainly the white supremacist kind of
Yeah.
threads out of that movement, which was all about Aryan ascended masters and different hierarchies of spiritual and racial beings, etc., etc. So it's all there. But whether it is more so now, I mean, my sense is that the far right will just jump on anything that they think can gain them some
Yeah.
traction, and they particularly like communities of dissent and opposition and communities that feel that they are threatened or somehow kind of minoritized or oppressed or frustrated by the culture, and that's the UFO community is one of those communities. So
Yeah. Big time.
there's no question that there are ongoing active attempts from the far right to worm their way into esoteric movements of all stripes, kind of underground music cultures, political extreme left and extreme right political cultures. They're the Green Movement. They're always trying to get to sort of leverage their way into these communities. But historically, the UFO culture has always been there's always been that element within the culture. I'm just trying to think of
Absolutely.
what was the group? APEN, was it? Trying to remember. There were various mysterious organizations that appeared sort of through the 70s and 80s also that turned out to be far-right groups masquerading as UFO groups. I think APEN was one in the UK. But I mean, in the States now, and I've actually just been writing about this, it's no accident that Tucker Carlson's suddenly taken a huge interest in UFOs. It's no accident.
He's doing cattle mutilation specials and stuff. I mean, like, it's unbelievable.
Really, yeah. I mean, again, I think partly, there are ratings boosting opportunities there, but also partly it's stoking up the sense of disentitlement, disenfranchisement, and and encouraging people to feel like the oppressed, essentially, and feel that the government, and every government has withheld UFO information from the public.
It's incredible.
Sorry.
No.
Just a sec. Sorry, Steve. Family business.
No problem. No problem.
I'll just be 1 second.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. No problem. Can you hear some lovely birds chirping in your background?
Yeah, it's lovely. The sun is shining.
Seems like a sunny day in England.
Shining for the first time in months. Sorry, what were we?
No, I want to move on to a burning question I have for you. So, I just interviewed Adam Gorightly, and we talked a lot about his wonderful book, Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks, which I feel like is along with Project Beta, it's a companion read to Mirage Men. I think
absolutely. Mirage Men, sandwiched between those two.
Yeah. All three of those books are like I feel like those are the first three books you should read if you want to get into these topics before you get into them. Yeah. But in his book, there is a moment where Adam writes that Richard Doty said, because I'm very fascinated by Jamie Chandray and his whole involvement in MJ12 and, all that stuff. But that Rick Doty supposedly said that Jamie Chandray came to that infamous Laughlin UFO conference that was kind of one of the, I would say set pieces almost of Mirage Men. But did you, because I feel like you would have recognized Jamie Chandray. Did you or John did you hear about this or like?
No, and we wouldn't have recognized him, but we were with Greg Bishop, who wrote incredibly central figure, in the sort of in the interesting end of the American sort of UFO culture. We were with him, and he would have
definitely
absolutely known who Jamie was. And we were with Rick Doty, more than half the time, and I'm sure Jamie would have come over to say hi to Rick as well. So
exactly.
I don't know. I mean, he's the impression is he was someone who, as happens, went in too deep, too fast, and was just sort of burned up on entry, and he was someone from the TV and film world who kind of threw himself. I don't know the detail of how whether Bill Moore kind of drew him into the UFO world or if he found Bill Moore. I can't remember exactly how that happened. I do know that he was involved in producing kind of UFO related stuff before UFO Cover Up Live, wasn't he? And before the kind of
it's one of those things where he says he was, but then when you try to IMDb, which an internet movie database, is pretty thorough. And I just know this because they'll put like short films I did like 20 years ago I'm like, why is that on IMDb? Anyway, but they're pretty thorough. And if you look up Jamie Chandray, all he's listed as is an extra in like a low budget horror movie from the 70s. So even his like film career, him being a film producer, I'm like, well, he has no credits out there at all. So that's even questionable. But apparently, I think he approached William Moore as to do a documentary project.
Okay, right,
about UFOs, something like that.
But
you don't think he was there?
I'm confident he wasn't at Laughlin. Yeah.
Adam seems confident about that too.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say. The other night my wife goes to bed kind of early. She fell asleep, and I'm like, well, maybe I'll pop open a nice bottle of Cabernet, sit down and watch Hypernormalization, which it's an Adam Curtis documentary. I won't go too much in. I feel like it's a movie people should probably watch. But it's a documentary piece. But in the middle of this documentary, they included a nice little section using a lot of the footage and information from Mirage Men. And I'm just curious, how did that come about? Did you guys kind of educate Adam Curtis, or did he read your book? Because, I mean, the whole UFO disinformation really just fit in with the premise of hypernormalization. I was really happy to see that section.
Yeah, I knew and know Adam through friends. So he very early on, I'd spoken to him about the project, and he was aware of it, and his 2002 film, The Power of Nightmares, was a big influence on Mirage Men, the film, certainly. So, we'd been in touch with Adam and talking to him, from the beginning, and also John Ronson, who's another documentarian and writer.
I love him.
And they're good friends as well. So there was a kind of, we were, it took us a long time. We went through, it was through John Ronson, we tried hard to get kind of a formal TV production company involved in the early days of Mirage Men, but it was a marker of just how dead the UFO subject was in the sort of early 2000s that just nobody wanted anything to do with it. It just said, why would you do this? We were just trying to explain why it was interesting. But John and Adam Curtis, John Ronson and Adam Curtis, both immediately saw what was interesting about it, and very, very graciously, they both came to a private test screening of a very early cut, and both gave us lots of advice and ideas and suggestions for improving it. So, but then I can't remember how long ago it was, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, Hypernormalization, but Adam just said, could we use some Mirage Men footage? So, but it totally, we in certain areas we think along the same path. I'd say he has been a big influence on my thinking, certainly.
Well, I think his documentaries are fantastic, and I really couldn't recommend them enough. But I mean, I do think it kind of is a testament to, because hypernormalization now is kind of reached cult status. I think, at least over here, like, people who are into it can't shut up about it. Right. Like myself, I'm telling my friends, you have to watch this movie, man. Like, maybe have a couple beers in you because it gets heavy. But
it captures them. It reflects a moment perfectly, doesn't it? No, it reflects our cultural moment, or that cultural moment perfectly. Yeah, I
think it does better.
Oh, sorry.
No. Please go ahead, please.
I just remembered that we actually, in trying to sell Mirage Men to TV production companies, we were calling it The Power of Nightmares with Aliens. That was our kind of our elevator pitch.
Perfect. That's a good pitch.
But sorry.
But I was saying, I'm so sorry. I just want to compliment you and John again, but I think really it is a testament to the importance and the power of the Mirage Men book and the film that it was included in such a seminal piece, because I do really think Mirage Men is like, while it was important when you wrote it and it's been important since then, I feel like right now it is like like if you're interested in, you don't even have to be interested in UFOs to get a lot out of it. But I do think it is such a timely book right at this very moment. And and I think for a lot of people who are, have a lot of their belief system invested in UFOs and the paranormal, it's probably a hard book for them to read, but one I would definitely encourage people to, you know, steel yourself and sit down and read this book. I'm not
No,
saying like it's that, disrupting to one's
no.
mind, but it can be if you have a belief system wrapped up in UFOs.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much. And the intention, on writing it, there are multiple intentions. One was to, write the one UFO book. You would, if you just read one UFO book, I wanted it to be that one, although I'm now trying to write another one that I think is actually that one. But
Ooh, cool.
which I may or may not want to talk about, but
Yeah, no problem.
but I wanted it to be that book. I also wanted it to be a book that you didn't have to be interested in UFOs to draw interest
Mhm.
from. I also wanted it to be a book that by talking about UFOs was actually talking about the world that we're living in.
Yeah.
And 15 years later, 14 years, well, when I actually started writing it, almost 20 years later, it seems quite naive in some respects, the way that exponentially the madness of our world now compared to when it was pretty mad when I wrote it, but it's
Right.
many times more crazier now, thanks
Yeah.
to thanks to the internet and social media,
Yep.
in part, largely, but and I also wanted it to help people who were kind of entrenched in UFO beliefs and in UFO culture. So, and to be a good read, so I wanted it to be
Yeah.
all those things, and it does some of those. But it's been incredible. It has been incredible. So much, so many years later, that the book has found a new audience and people, people like yourself and a new generation of brilliant people, interested in this strange saucer-shaped pool of, on a far distant peninsula of our culture. But it's just, it's been amazing. It's not something you would have, you would expect as a writer, so it's very gratifying.
Good.
And it's just wonderful that people still want to talk about it and that it's still working for people.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't.
Well, I
Oh, you go ahead.
sorry. Please go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I have a feeling, Mark, that this book is going to be read and important for a long, long time, because it's not necessarily a book that is like about a certain time period. It's really just a comment on the UFO culture that is, and a lot of the same issues are absolutely happening today. I mean, I ventured to guess that to you, actually, this is a question I have for you. Is it shocking to you to see that Rick Doty, now almost more than ever, is on UFO podcasts, UFO like YouTube shows? I mean, like, to a whole new group of UFO disclosure activists, he's almost looked as this heroic figure, which to me is like, I just can't believe it. It's shocking to me. But are you surprised all these years later, knowing what we absolutely know about Rick Doty, that he's still out there almost more than ever, Mark? It's wild.
Yeah, it is wild, but at the same time, it's not at all surprising. And in all genuineness, I'm kind of happy for him. He's found this is what he wanted. I think this is actually what he
Yeah.
wanted to be doing all along.
Right.
So I'm glad he's kind of able to do that. And he doesn't have, for a long time, that there were tensions with his professional, with all along again with a lot of those Avery figures. The tensions were with their professional existence, and Rick certainly that was an issue for him, but it's not anymore. So he's free to say what he likes, and he certainly does. But also, I mean,
Yeah.
coming back to this idea of him as a, almost like a kind of crusading character, that was always part of his self. I think it was always part of his self identity. And I talk about Mirage Men, the alleged novel that he wrote with Bill Moore and Bob Pratt, in which he is kind of fictionalized as a whistleblower who exposes the truth about the American government alien contact cover-up, is assassinated by the Men in Black, and then is given a kind of burial in space by the extraterrestrials who see him as a hero. And I think that's, I do think that's baked into his kind of identity. But I mean, but it also amazes me that it doesn't amaze me. It's entirely predictable that people would prefer to listen to, what he has to say than what other people than we have to say. But I think a serious point is then, this is something I am actively trying to think about and hopefully write about. Is like, people, there are different reasons people come to this material, and for a lot of people, it's just fun, and they just want to hear crazy stories and tell their friends crazy stories that may be, that may be true, and it's not, initially not necessarily a problem. People just want to say, "Oh my God, there's an alien base in Dulce, New Mexico, where they, process cows and turn them into, alien smoothies or whatever it is." It's fine. It's not, I don't. On one level, that's harmless. It can become harmful, and that's where the manipulation of this lore and stories becomes potentially dangerous and can radicalize people, and you only need one radical to do one radicalized person, as we know, see all the time, to do something awful, and that's horrific. So but I think for most people it's just fun. I just don't, I think there are people who, especially on social media, there are a few dozen people who kind of have invested their identity and their personality and possibly some of their livelihood into kind of being UFO personalities, and then that's where tensions arise. Things get aggressive because people are staking out their claims and staking out their territories and having to have pissing contests and etc. Which is all just human culture. But for almost for 90% of people who are exposed to UFO and paranormal and parapolitical culture, it's a weird mixture of fun, outrage, wonderment, and fear. But it's all, for most people, I think it is kind of compartmentalized into a space that's both maybe real, but maybe not, and you can kind of, it can be, it is so separated out from your quotidian existence, but it can at the same time, as we're saying, it can then be turned into something else. But it's I think I think you don't want to problematize UFO bullshit too much, because in doing so, then you actually give the sense that maybe this, oh my God, maybe it is dangerous, maybe it is real. Then people start actually treating it as such. It's a problem if you're the military or the intelligence services and you've got people haranguing you constantly, trying to extract information that you don't have, or you are not in any way obliged or at liberty to share, with people
Right.
who may or may not be doing the bidding of unfriendly nations' intelligence services. That's that's a problem. But that's not so
Yeah.
much what we're talking about here.
Right. Well, in terms of Doty, do you think nowadays, when he's on podcasts and doing interviews on YouTube shows and whatnot, do you think he is totally just doing this as an interested civilian? Or do you think, like there's always kind of that adage with, at least in the States where it's like, well, once you're a, CIA agent, you never leave the company and you're always, like, I have no idea if any of that's true. I'm not a Tom Clancy novel reader. So, but, so I don't know the machinations of that. But, do you think Doty is just doing this all, like you kind of said, like this is what he always wanted to be doing? Or do you think he's still kind of answering to someone and purposely feeding bad information out there at the behest of someone else, I guess?
Yeah. So here's a weird thing. In hindsight, I do actually think when we were dealing with him instead of the main period we were dealing with him from sort of 2006 to 2010, I think he was I now think he probably was talking to people like Jay Stratton, and the people involved at the DoD with ORSAP and what became ATIP and things. I think he probably weirdly, we didn't know it at the time because no one knew it existed. But in hindsight, I do actually wonder if he was talking to them, and that the whole Serpo thing he was involved with may have had some connection to that world. And this is just speculative, but the timing fits, and certain things he said kind of would fit, and it would make sense that there was again another group within the defense establishment who were trying to promote beliefs about extraterrestrial contact, etc., for whatever reason. So I do wonder if he was, through his history, through his connections with with the intelligence world and a lot of the people who all the people we've been talking about, who were connected to that world, he may have been part of that. Whether he is now, I don't know. He he's a prominent figure. People obviously want to talk to him and hear his position. So again, it might be useful for someone to use him, or to kind of share information with him. But I don't know. As you said earlier, I don't think you need to anymore. It's just all you need to do is make a tweet and have a couple of sock puppets bouncing around, and then before you know it, you've got a new movement. You have
a new mythology.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't
create a mythology in 5 minutes now.
Yeah, and so before, I don't think Twitter had started. It hadn't. When the Serpo story was basically a pre-Twitter attempt to do that very thing, but use it exploiting mailing lists and networks of enthusiasts connected through this Victor Martinez's mailing list. But again, that wouldn't have happened. I think now it would just be happening through Twitter or X, and
for sure,
and other social media networks, and Discord and Telegram and all the rest. So, but it's you can see the same MO being applied, all the way through. And this is something I was trying to talk about in Mirage Men. You just see the same MO of dissemination of crumbs of disinformation and misinformation being drip fed into these communities by whatever the most expedient route is at a given time. And now it's obviously you can't turn the tap off now. That's the that's the problem.
Have you found? Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask, like, in the 70s and 80s that I know of, and maybe the funding for the research went on much longer than that. But there definitely was some, government funding into psychic research, and the whole Stanford Research Center thing, which Valet, Kit Green, Hal Puthoff, all those kinds of names that we hear quite often were all involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if like the same sort of like disinformation campaign was somewhat applied to that. I mean, I don't know. I know UFOs are unique in the paranormal world because they do like, there is like a defense threat about them because they're in our skies and stuff like that. Like Bigfoot's not to be as feared, obviously, as UFOs because there is like, militaristic, ramifications with UFOs. But do you think any of the kind of like psychic research that was coming out of Stanford, do you think there was any kind of like, operation with that as well?
Very much so. It's always been my assumption that so you go back to, and as you were talking, I was trying to remember the name of the authors, but I can't. But there's a book that came out, I think, either late like 1969, 1970, 71, called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. And it was a batch of research papers that were given by Soviet scientists or by people posing as Soviet scientists to a couple of American journalists traveling in Russia, and it was all about Russian research into psychic abilities and telekinesis, telepathy, mind sort of mental mind control, and I and the whole business with Stanford Research Institute, Uri Geller being extracted from Israel, where he was a kind of psychic entertainer. Him being extracted via Edgar Mitchell and Andrea Puharich to the CIA in America and to the Stanford Research Institute was a direct response to the dissemination of these Russian Soviet psychical research papers. The other people like Ira Einhorn were distributing these. Jack Sarfati was probably involved around that time. So yeah, there's not, and I've long suspected that this was some kind of influence operation being carried out in the classic way by the Soviet counterintelligence for reasons that whatever we can probably try to deduce or kind of extract, but this was part of a classic long game sort of Soviet intelligence operation. There's a brilliant researcher who occasionally touches into this material called Dave Troy, who's very active on Twitter, and
yes, I follow. Yeah,
he's talked a lot about Russian cosmism and Possadism and the whole Teilhard de Chardin noospheric kind of theories of kind of the mind at large as being a kind of giant kind of literal kind of telepathic sphere around the earth in which kind of thought forms and ideas kind of are distributed. Anyway, these are ideas that are very popular in the New Age community and the psychical research community, emerged in part from sort of Soviet thinking of the sort of early mid 20th century, but also tie in with proto New Age ideas from sort of theosophy and early days of psychical research in the States and in the UK with the Society for Psychical Research in London. So there's a whole kind of sphere, literally, of ideas of psychic psychical influence and action at a distance and remote viewing, all these things emerged into the kind of parapolitical sphere in the sort of 60s and 70s, and people like Andrea Puharich were absolutely central to that, who was the guy that brought Uri Geller, who was commissioned to bring Uri Geller to the CIA from Israel. And if anyone hasn't read it, one of my all-time favorite bizarre books that's just absolutely beyond far out is Uri. Andrea Puharich's kind of early biography of Uri Geller. It's the first written, I think it's 1973 or 1974. It is, you can't even begin to kind of describe the levels of high strangeness going on in that book. But again, he's an incredibly interesting character. A friend suggested I should be writing a biography of Andrea Puharich, and it's actually a really good idea. It's something I think about.
I don't disagree because I mean there is not a lot known about him other than he was like instrumental in studying mushrooms in Mexico, and he had this place where he was testing people up in like the northern East and like the burned down, he's one of those enigmatic figures in the paranormal world that little is known about.
He was absolutely one of these figures that bridged the intelligence world, he's basically was one of the absolute central figures of the parapsychological research field globally. He was definitely doing intelligence jobs. He was trying to develop mind control implants for the US. Can't remember. I think it was for the CIA. The classic dental, the kind of conspiracy theory dental implant. He was trying to do that in the 1940s. I think there's a section on him in Annie Jacobson's book Phenomena. That's the only kind of focused biographical. There's like a chapter on him in there. But he's always been a figure of supreme interest, based on again his involvement in all these fields that and end up being what I was talking about the same fields of influence, but through the UFO lens rather than the sort of parapsychological lens. Anyway, to answer your question, sorry, yes, I do.
No,
this is what I warned you about.
Yes,
I do.
Well, no, I mean you answered the question thoroughly. I mean, because that's I think like myself and probably many people have speculated and wondered if if they're doing it with UFOs, why would they not be doing this stuff? And also, anytime the military or the government or three-letter agencies are involved in some kind of Fortean research, I feel like one thing Mirage Men taught me to do is be highly skeptical of anything coming from those realms. I think you can love UFOs and read about UFOs and care about UFOs, but when it comes from the military and some of these sources we're talking about, I think you just really have to have your guard up.
For sure. And there's no question that in the early days, in the 50s, in the early days of MK Ultra, the CIA's essentially mind control operation attempting to use hallucinogenics and other and chemicals and mushrooms and technologies to kind of manipulate people's thoughts and actions. There's no question at all that they were sending. I've now blanked on his name. How annoying. Oh well. Anyway, it'll come back to me. But they were sending researchers into the field to attend seances, to attend parapsychological conferences, to attend, to visit laboratories, and to try and draw any information, that useful information that they could.
Right. Were you thinking of General Stubblebine?
No, this is earlier. He was a very famous American stage magician His name, who was
Randy, amazing. No,
no,
not
no,
amazing
this is
Randy.
earlier. It'll pop back into my head. He wrote a
Okay,
famous manual called the Trickster's Manual for the CIA on how to use stage magic techniques in deception, kind of agent
what?
field work.
Amazing.
His name will pop back into my head as soon as we stop this discussion.
Right, of course.
But he was sent out. I mean, very curiously, he was actually sent out. Do you remember the? Is it? Again, sorry, I feel I'm clearly reaching the end of my useful focus here.
No, yeah, I only have. I'm going to let you go in a second here.
That's okay. The Hopkinsville, Kentucky Goblins case.
Oh,
the
yeah,
one
sure.
from the 50s that inspired Gremlins.
Right.
He was actually sent to interview the family and try and work out, what was going on there. Again, as part of this research, almost certainly certainly for the CIA to try and understand, if there was anything they could use from this kind of group hallucination that spun out of control in such a legendary fashion. It's annoying me. I've got the book somewhere up here. But,
I feel like I know who you're talking about. I can't remember the name either. It'll come to me. Like you said, well, you have given me so much of your time, and this has been so fast. These are questions I've wanted to ask you for now almost 14 years. So this feels great for me. But I do have one more kind of comment / question for you before
I cheated. It's John Mulholland. Is the John Mulholland?
What was his name again?
John.
Actually,
Mulholland?
I have not heard that. Okay.
I cheated and looked him up quickly on the internet.
Good.
Anyway, sorry, but yes, he was sent out by the CIA to do all this stuff. So
that is fascinating. See, that's a wrinkle to that story I have not heard. You don't hear about those aspects. I guess you just hear about the salacious goblins coming from the cave, which is a little more fun, I suppose. But one kind of. A while back, I'm a big fan of Erica Luke's and Jack Brewer's work and their Friday night show. Yeah, they're wonderful and such sweet people. You were on Erica's show. Gosh, I don't even know. Maybe it might have been close to a year ago, but you said something which I thought was so kind of a great distillation of how you see this stuff. And I don't know if Erica posed this question to you, but and if I'm misquoting you, please forgive me. But you said something to the effect of, I subscribe to the belief that weird shit happens to people. When kind of being asked, like, what do you think about Fortean topics for the paranormal and UFOs? Would you mind kind of explaining, like, what you mean by that?
Yeah.
And am I getting the quote right? Was that the right what you said?
I wouldn't. I would be the worst person you could possibly ask about something I've.
It was something to that effect. I promise.
No, I mean, I know what you're referring to. I do have a kind of. I think there's a important separation to be made between the UFO lore and the culture and the stories that surround it and the experiences that people have seeing things in the sky that they don't understand, having and then sort of entering into the UFO kind of sphere and trying to make sense of it. I think that's a really important distinction to be made between those stories, which to me are like, they're the sort of religious catechism, they're the religious lore, they are the, that is the narrative structure of the UFO field. But I think there's a big distinction to be made between that and what you might call the Gnostic experience, the direct experience of engagement, contact, interaction with what appear to be non-human intelligences. And that's something that's happened forever, as long as humans have documented their experiences. There have been accounts that are, shaped, narrativized, embellished and kind of formed by the cultures that they emerge from, and that's just always happened. And I think I have a great deal of respect for people who talk about their often very troubling, puzzling, confusing, frightening experiences of this otherness, whatever it is. But
Right.
I think it's actually important to separate that out from the UFO culture.
Yeah.
So yes, that's what I mean. Weird shit happens. Could be. I'm sure I put my keys down here, and now they've gone. That's weird shit. But
Yeah.
there's
Yes. Yes.
also weird shit of, I went for a walk. I was hit by a blinding light. I was speaking to Jesus and a talking dog while lying on an operating table. And then I woke up somewhere else entirely, 3 hours later. That's something else. But I do think it's important to listen to people that have these, overwhelming experiences, which, not after decades of being interested in this stuff, my sense is that these are actually internally generated in some ways, or kind of interactions with, a point at which the external world and your interior world kind of collide in puzzling ways. I'm possibly used to think that and I have weirder I have weirder ideas, which I've
Right.
tried to think
Uh-huh.
about, maybe not successfully, but that these could be interactions between us and us in
Yeah.
an externalized fashion,
Mm-hmm.
with these ideas of that have been around in the parapsychological and spiritualist community, worlds forever, that sometimes, whatever makes up our consciousness can exist in outside of our, or separate to our physical forms, and maybe sometimes people encounter that, or they
Yeah.
have interactions with this in some way. This is obviously purely speculative and
Sure.
kind of suppositional, but anyway. But I think those are people filming flashing lights in the sky is something entirely different, and I don't and the UFO culture largely through the abduction narrative, but also through the contactee narratives of the early days of the UFO story, you know, incorporated these perennial kind of Gnostic visionary encounters with otherness, and incorporated them into, as all religions try to do, and all movements will try to do, or spiritual movements will try to do, so claim them for themselves. But I
Yeah.
think we need to keep them separate. So yes, so I guess that's what I'm saying is.
No, that makes perfect sense to me.
Anytime I do I still occasionally do UFO talks to UFO groups, and I enjoy it. Sorry, I think the cat's trying to get in.
Sorry.
But when I do, I'm always make clear that I separate out these areas, because I think it's essential to do so, and I think it's essential if people do have these whatever overwhelming encounters with otherness. It's important not for them to try and keep them away from the cultural streams that try to kind of claim them, and you want to try and talk to them before they've decided that they're abducted by aliens, or visited by angels,
Right.
or
Yeah.
met the Nomo, or whatever it is, and yes. So again, that's then you get into the whole interesting world of psychedelic experience, which I think that's all connected to, and that's a whole whole other story, and attempts to directly engage with the other through spiritualist or kind of noospheric contact. This kind of all of
Mhm.
these things that have happened. A remote viewing in some sense is involved with this.
Right.
I have a friend who's been talking to an interdimensional um, culture while on ketamine for years now, and has
Wow.
learned a lot from them. But as John Lilly, who is another ephemeral,
Oh
he was
yeah.
another player in the wider, what we'd see as the outer Avery. He was doing the same in the 60s and 70s and 80s, right to
Yeah.
the end of his life.
Yep.
So and all these things, they overlap, but they are I don't think they're all the same. I'll stop talking. I'm rambling now, but
No. That was a really that was a great answer. That's kind of the clarification I was kind of wanting to get from what I thought was a great quote about how you see, the
yeah,
Fortean topics that I love to talk about.
yeah,
Mark, thank you so much for giving me nearly 2 hours of your time. I'm so
it's a
sorry.
pleasure. Okay,
But this
very
this was this was such a treat for me. I've like I said, I read Mirage Men. I think in 2010 it came out, right when it came out, and it was a real game changer for me. Like,
good.
and it
Glad.
came at the right time. Yeah, it really and like I said, it's a book I have bought for friends. I actually bought it for one friend who was really into UFOs, and he was mad at me when he read it. But then after a couple months, he was like, no, actually, you did me a favor. But like, at first he was like, why are you giving me this book? Like, this isn't the stuff I love. I'm like, I know, buddy, but like, sometimes like, but I do think this is one of these books that everyone should read if they haven't read. And I think it's one of these books that's going to be very important for a long, long, long time. So
Great.
thank you for writing it. I would encourage you to, if you need a cheerleader, I'd write that Andrea Puharich book because I think it
Oh,
would be very enlightening.
that's one, but that would be a great book to write. I am trying to write a kind of follow up to Mirage Men at the moment,
Ooh, gosh.
but
Well,
will be a very different book, but as an attempt to again be the UFO book I want to be able to hand to people who are interested and
yeah,
say, this is a book you should read. But the whole landscape, my life is very different in terms of what I'm able to do with my time,
yeah,
but also the whole landscape of the of of everything has changed significantly. But on a positive
yeah,
note, there are now some really smart people,
yeah,
coming from academic worlds and just research worlds who are doing incredible work
yeah.
that might mean I don't actually have to write the book and someone else will do it.
Well,
um,
I hope you do it because you have a good voice. You're funny when we need comedy because like I do think there's great laughing moments in
oh
Mirage
yeah,
Men. Like it's not
yeah,
like this like serious book that's like no it's I think there's like a decent amount of satire in it which I appreciate. So yeah, I think I can speak for all of us, Mark, when I say we are very much looking forward to your next contribution to the world of the weird, my friend, because
okay,
you have a
well, thank you.
very unique perspective, and just it's you do your research, and it's just wonderful. So, my friend, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm going to put a bunch of links in the show notes where you can find Mark's work. Is there anything you want to plug before we kind of sign off?
Nothing particular. Just please do check out Strange Attractor Press. Um, that's my day job really. But it's a wonderful day job. So I encourage
Yeah.
people to check out what we do there. But yeah, it's been a real pleasure, Steve. Thank you for making it so enjoyable. And
Oh, thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Well, I've been a great fan of your work for a long time, my friend. And thank you so much for joining us on A High Strangeness. Everyone, have a wonderful dinner tonight. See you next time. Bye-bye.
great.